Hi, welcome back to my channel. I've got, as you can see, the front wheel of my Honda CB500 off. I've still got a little bit of an issue with this bike because I've got a slight wobble from the front wheel. Not too bad, but enough to need to kind of get it rectified really. I've already nipped up the steering head, the adjuster nut, and that did have a lot of free play in it. Those front forks were kind of wobbling backwards and forwards. Well, I'd say there's too much free play in those, but the wobble on the front of the bike is still there, and I think possibly the next thing to do is the wheel bearing on the front. As you can see, if you've just put a bit of a wiggle on the spindle, there is way too much free play there. So I think that's pretty much what the issue is. So I've got a new set of bearings. I'm just going to go and drive these out, get the new set in, and see if that fixes the problem. There you go. That's one of the dust seals that's come out, slightly deformed. Absolutely no use. Anyway, get a new one in the kit. And you just lift out the speedo drive plate there. Just clean up, so I'm going to go get loads of grease on the wheel. And then we'll flip this over. I'm not going to touch the tyre because I've got greasy hands. Although I think I could probably do with replacing this tyre out anyway. So right, that's that one. And now I need to get the dust seal on the right hand side out. And that does a very, very tight fit. You've got to get the screwdriver right down the side of the dust seal and the hub. God, blimey. Here it comes. There we go. She's moving. Never point your sharp implement towards yourself when you're exerting pressure on it. That's, rule of thumb. Work your way round. There you go. And that's the other dust seal, effectively. Right, so I should now be able to show you. Just take these gloves off. There you go, so that's one side of, this is the right hand side of the bike, as you can see the brake disc there, and that's the bearing that needs to come out. So essentially what you do is you get a drift on the other side, and hopefully there's a bit of a lip on the other side of the bearing that I can just get a drift onto to knock this out through this side. I'll just flip this over anyway, and I'll do the other side first. Right, well, there wasn't quite enough room to get a drift behind the bearing from the other side, but there was enough room to get one of these pullers behind it, just a tiny bit. So I'll show you the puller afterwards. It's something I used actually when I was trying to get the bearings out of the steering head, and I was doing that, but that didn't work at all. So I ended up cutting the thing out. Anyway, so let's just see if this works. It's just a matter of the more you wind this down, it pushes the central. Oh, it's just turning. Yeah, it should work though. I think that's just turning. I don't think it's actually doing anything. Yeah, let's hold it like that. Any second now, if you hear a thump and a crash and a bang, that means all my bits and bobs of tools have gone kaput or just popped out and it's not worked. Which I think is what's happening basically. Yeah. Right, okay, well that didn't have enough master of not finishing sentences. I didn't have enough leverage on it to get behind that bearing. It wouldn't. Just not enough of a lip. Silly, really. Real bad design flaw. You make a bearing that's designed to fit really tight, and you make the diameter of the inner race the same as the diameter of the rest of the sort of tube that the spindle goes through, and guess what? It's too tight to pull out with anything other than a drift, and you can't get a drift behind it. We'll see if that sort of repositioned it, maybe that will work. Got to try these things, haven't you? You never know. Quite impressed if one day this does actually work. I've not got it to work on anything yet, so it would work if it had enough purchase on what it was trying to pull, put it that way. Not sure if this is gonna. Can't see anything moving, to be honest. No, I think all that's happening is the puller is pulling its way through the inner race of the bearing and out. I don't think it's got a bite on anything, so yeah, that's exactly what's happening. What a load of old rubbish. Right, so you can kind of see what the problem is now in terms of trying to use a drift to get these bearings out, which just doesn't work, or hasn't worked for me, in the sense that the drift has to come up through the bottom where the other bearing is currently sat, up through this hole here and onto the back of the inner race here. The problem being is that normally you've got this spacer in there, and there's literally no way of getting a flat bladed screwdriver through that hole and onto the back of this inner race. There's literally no lip left. Even though there's a little bit of free play on there, you just can't do it. So you have to drill these little things out, which is a big pain in the arse. Now I've got most of this bearing out, and I've still got to just grind out this outer race. Obviously that just lifts out, and I can, as you can see, get a drift very easily behind the bearing on the other side. So that one I should just be able to knock out. All I've got to do is really just finish drilling this one out. So what I'm using is a tungsten carbide bit that is severely worn down. It's been used to grind out all of the bearing material, and at the moment I'm just literally hitting the wall of it. So it looks like a lot of mess. There's a lot of metal in there that's just sort of loose as fine powder now, really. But as soon as that's kind of just cut through there, as far as the wall of the hub, then all the pressure will be off this outer race, and it will just pop out. I did exactly the same thing with the head bearings. So it looks a mess, but it's not really. This bearing doesn't sit down as far as the seat there, and of course if you only damage the wall of the hub in one space, 95% of the seating material is still going to be there. All of this is just immaterial, it just doesn't matter. So there you go. So it's been a bit of a sod, but I guess that's just what would happen if you took it to the garage and they had to do it. You wouldn't see what was going on behind the scenes. Yeah, these do seem to be quite problematic. Generally speaking, when you look in any manual, the description is to get a drift behind the bearing and knock it out from the other side, and on this you just can't. So there you go. I'll show you a little bit later getting those bearings back in, but for now I'm just going to continue to finish this one off and take the other one out from the other side. Just going to square this up on the grindstone because it's just it just rounds, which means you don't get a good angle on what you're trying to cut inside the too much material left there. There you go, you can see it's chopped through now, so just really a question of getting some sort of bars and things behind it just to bend it in to relieve the pressure. Then I should be able to just pull it out. So I've already managed to, you can see, break a pair of my long nose pliers. So these are tough little suckers. Deary me. Okay, well, little tiny bit more grinding of the other side just to weaken it a little bit, and a little bit of prying and pulling, and out it comes. So yeah, not the easiest thing, but so yeah, just need to get in there now. If you can see, there you go, you can see how much of a lip you've got on the other bearing now. I can just get down there with a kind of even a large flat-ended rod and just smack that one out. So I'm not worried about all the superficial damage to the hub here. It's really not an issue because it's the bearing that's doing all the work, and there's plenty of material in there. It will just seat in okay, so that's all fine. But anyway, yeah, that was really hard. I'll get the other one out, get the new bearings in, get the wheel back on. Hopefully that'll sort it all out. I didn't even show you this on video, but this one took 20 seconds. And all I used was this just as a rod with a hammer, and that was it. So what I've done so far, left side of the wheel, I sat the bearing just on top of the hub, and then I gave it a bit of a tap, a very light tap with a wooden mallet, so as not to damage the bearing. So what I'm going to go and do now is I'm going to use an oversized socket. This is a 30mm, and just sit it on top, because of course you can't bash it down any further with a mallet because you're just hitting the hub. You do need to make sure, and this is, as I said, the 30mm this one, you do need to make sure that you find a socket that does sit on the metal of the bearing, and it's not too large so that it won't go down into the actual hub itself, or not too small that it actually sits on the soft plastic material that's sort of a bit of a dust cover protecting the actual bearing material inside. Of course, because you'll damage that and you'll damage the bearings inside potentially. So this is going to be my preferred method. You could, of course, fashion using some doweling, again a puller and a couple of nuts. They're quite easy to make, but this is what I'm going to go ahead and do. It did actually knock in quite easily, so I don't think I need to resort to that. All the way home. Well, so very quickly, got the speedo plate back in, the little rubber seals each side, spindle knocked through, and there's next to no play there, good and solid. So that should have done the job, I think. I think that's probably the culprit of the wobble that I was getting on the steering head, on the steering. Anyway, let's get this wheel back on. So just make sure you get this nut done up good and tight. I just use this breaker bar, the same bar that I took it off with. Gives you good torque on it. And before you reinstall the caliper, make sure you clean the whole disc off, both sides, with a bit of brake cleaner, because invariably that would have got a good bit of sort of grease and that kind of whatnot on it during this procedure. And check the tyre as well, because that's going to have spots of grease and all kinds of muck on it that are just going to, could just take you off. I'm probably going to go ahead and change this tyre anyway, because whilst it's not even near the legal limit, I am just a great believer in safety on bikes. You get a point of rubber on the ground, doesn't give you any grip, but it does need to dispel water. So I've not changed the tyre on this bike at all in the 10,000 miles I've ridden it in, so I've had a good life out of it. There you go.